well, good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you're at. I appreciate you all taking time out of your busy schedule to attend today's webinar. And we're going to be talking about, if you're wondering what it is, we're going to talk about Teleport, a brief overview of Teleport for beginners. So I'm your host. Alan is Valancourt. It's my name. I'm a sales engineer. I cannot talk. I'm a sales engineer here with Teleport and been part of the team for a couple months now, I think since February, and live here in South Carolina. So before I jump in technical, I always like to brag on my family because, I do what I do because I love them. I got two boys that are full of energy. We have a puppy that is our new addition to our household over the last few months. So it's been enjoyable having her. It's like having a kid all over again, trying to figure out potty training and all that. And then the top right, I just something fun, a little bit geeky. I like to play and collect speed cubes, Rubik's cubes. I'm not the fastest person in the world, but it's something I do enjoy. It's a great fidget cube stress relief. So if you're ever on a really long virtual seminar, hopefully not this one, and you find yourself needing something, picking up one of those, I think will be a lot of fun. But also a few housekeeping rules as before we kind of dive into this. We have chat and Q&A, so please raise your hand or type in a question or feel free to ask any questions. I want this to be informative for you. If you're new to Teleport, you've never seen it before, or you've heard a little bit about it, we are going to cover a few slides, the basics of it, and then dive into a little bit of a technical demo. But just wanted to throw that out there along that line. So anyways, let's begin. What is Teleport? When we hear that, people say, hey, what is Teleport? What does it do? Well, in our parlance, our language, as we call it, it's an access plane. And you're like, okay, so what's an access plane? In essence, what it says here, right? We're allowing engineers and security professionals, DevOps, you name it, to unify your access across all kinds of environments and behind NAT translation. Whether it's server access for SSH servers, Kubernetes access for Kubernetes clusters, application access, and database access. Those are our four key pieces there, with some new additional stuff coming down the pipeline, which is super exciting as well. And what this does, what we're doing with it, was we're trying to simplify how our engineers, how users are accessing these resources. In the traditional world of doing things or seeing things, you have this tension in three areas. You've got access workflows, giving people the permissions and rights and roles to access things that they need to do, managing those credentials, whether it's SSH keys, username and passwords, certificates. And then you have this compliance and auditing piece, which is huge, right? If you're PCI, SOC 2, FedRAMP, variety of compliance and auditing type of things there. And how that, you look at the scales, our illustration here, and how that works is you've got a security team in a company that is like, hey, we need to have all these in place. But what happens if you have too much of that agility piece of a company disappears, right? You have more layers to go through. Firewalls are locked down, VPCs are tight, permissions, and it can become cumbersome. So companies that are trying to be more agile, be more DevOpsy, and automate things, it can get slower. You go the opposite side and you get too agile, right? It's the Wild West, and now you got security issues that kind of go out the door. So trying to balance those is always, I think, always a challenge with teams, with security teams, with DevOps teams, and everyone across the board. So our goal with Teleport is to kind of simplify some of that and hopefully alleviate some of that pain. So how do we do that? We do that with one way of using identity certificates. So in a traditional environment, so we'll go back to SSH servers as an example. If your users are traditionally used to using public-private keys to access these resources, there's some, other issues along that line as far as, what happens when the user moves on and, what happens if that key gets compromised, et cetera. So we do that with things like we eliminate some of that by using SSH certificates along with X509 certificates. And so you're talking to an IDP, your SSO provider that supports SAML OIDC, and you're getting these short-lived certificates that then now have things here illustrated like permissions and who you can talk to, what environments, and then you have an expiration time. So it's not out there forever. And that's all based on roles, right? We use heavily role-based access control, which in today's world is really keying of managing access to anything. Whereas in the old days, and maybe even in your environment today, where you just throw a permission, everybody has admin. Well, now with the maturity of RBAC, you can leverage that and really get granular, right? As an example, user A, James, is an admin, or maybe John Smith is an intern or developer. So by using role-based access controls, you really get a chance to limit and manage that. And so Teleport uses that heavily for access. And then another piece of the puzzle, which we'll show here, and it might be a little hard to see in this little animated image here, is the ability to view and see what's happening in your environments in real time, either like live session recording, audit trail, audit logs, and all that stuff. So we kind of tackle that as well. And then session sharing. This is a virtual webinar, right? So people are attending probably all over the world. And so maybe you work in your company where employees are all over the world. Like our company, we're a distributed company. We got employees all over the United States, all over Europe, Asia, even Australia and everything. And so that can be challenging if you need to share access into a system. So using a tool like Teleport, you can actually share those sessions and enable other users to log in and gain access in order to see what's happening. And then we have another piece here where from a compliance audit standpoint, especially from a security team, right, or change control, being able to have access requests, being able to grant users limited access or one-time access kind of on demand. So an example here, we're showing whether it's Slack, which you can get notifications, or maybe something like Jira, where you can go through an access workflow. So you can use some of that with our API to tie into that. And then underneath it all, Teleport is an open source project. It has been open source from the beginning, and we'll have a link here in the slides here at the end where you can actually go out right now and see the issues that our team is working on, look at our pull requests, look at our roadmap, and actually get involved within our community as well. So it leads me to lines like, so who uses Teleport? And as an example, just right here, I've got a couple logos, Nasdaq, IBM, Snowflake, for example. If you go on our website, we do have a list of more enterprises that are using it. But Teleport, both its open source as well as our enterprise version of it, is being used by companies all over the world to manage access to systems wherever they're at. And we'd love to know if you're using it today, maybe in open source. Let us know as well, because being that it's a GitHub project and it's open source, we don't necessarily know who may or may not be using it. So from a high level, let's kind of dig into what Teleport looks like before we jump right into it. So we have an authentication server that you see right here, and then you have a proxy that sits in front of it. So that auth server has a certificate authority behind it that is signing these short-lived certificates for users. So let's say I'm a developer and I need to gain access to, whether it's an SSH server or Kubernetes or a database, I'm going to log into Teleport using whatever tool I'm used to using, and whether it's the web or the command line. Now Teleport's going to talk to your SSO provider, and that's where you store your source of truth. So let's say my SSO provider is Okta or Google or GitHub. So it goes there and it sees John Doe, or it sees Alan, Alan logs in and it says, hey, Alan should be an admin. So then it passes that information back to Teleport and says, hey, according this user logging in, he's an admin and he should have admin rights. So then Teleport issues a short-lived certificate for this user that now gives them permissions of what resources they can access. And then, of course, that certificate has time to live on it, has other metadata, as we showed earlier, of what that user can do, etc. And then as an end user, I'm now able to access and do the work I need to do on my systems. And in the background, Teleport is auditing this information. So from a compliance standpoint, I'm now able to audit this information, push it out to a SIEM if I'm using something like Splunk or Datadog or Logarithm. And then now I can build telemetry, and I have, auditing and compliance that I can tie into this as well. Then, as I mentioned earlier, we have that access request portion of it where you can use Teleport to, we call it chat ops, right? Leveraging other tools to build these workflows, these one-time access requests that might come across the board. So being down that part of the piece, we're going to jump right here into the demo aspect of it here. And so I'm going to show a few things on the demo. I'm going to show the UI. I'm going to show the command line as well. So let's jump into that as I switch context here. All right, so let me go here. So in this piece here, so what I've got is two pieces here. I've got my Teleport login tool that's right here. I'm able to log in and access something, on Teleport right here. So I'm able to get into it. I've got a couple SSO providers that are listed here, and these providers are basically my source of truth, who I am that I say I am. So we're going to log in here from using Okta. I also have a terminal here, so I'm going to show how Teleport works from a terminal access command line. So let me zoom this in here a little bit there so we can switch context a little bit easier. So I'm going to authenticate to Okta. I've already signed into Okta on the back end. And so what Teleport does is it drops me into the UI, where immediately I can see, based on what roles I have, pieces of what environments I have access to. So for example, because I'm an administrator, it drops me in and I can see everything. So in my environment, I've got 6 different servers. These servers can be anywhere in the world. They could be edge devices. They could be a Raspberry Pi. They could be bare metal. They could be VMs. In my instance, I'm running a couple servers on Google Cloud. I'm also running a couple servers on AWS. And so because I'm an administrator, I have access to see all of this information. Same thing on a command line. You can see that I have logged in as a different user, and Teleport has issued me a certificate that's valid. Well, when I did this, 7 hours and 54 minutes left. In fact, if I go refresh this, you can see it's dropped a little bit. So even from here, I can now see all of the servers I have available as a user. So how does Teleport manage that? And this is the part where it comes into that role RBAC, role-based access control. So let me show you that. So because Okta says, hey, you should be an admin, I come across a Teleport, I'm issued an admin role. So I go in here within Teleport and I can see all the different roles that are available as an admin user that I can assign to different people. This is my admin role. For those of you who are looking at this saying, you know what, this looks a little bit like YAML, you are correct. It is YAML. So if you're familiar with using YAML from, just infrastructure as automation, infrastructure as code, Kubernetes, this is how we have built a lot of the configuration files, role files is all in YAML. So it makes it easier to digest, easier to use and adapt with different tools. So me as a user that has administrative rights, I'm able to see pretty much everything within my cluster. Now, granted, do we want to give everybody admin rights? Probably not. I know in my old sysadmin days, it was just sometimes easier when you have a small team and you trust someone, you just give them admin rights to a system. But in today's world where you got dynamic environments coming up and down, you got production systems and development systems, this is where you want to really define those roles and limit what users can and cannot see. So as an example, have a contractor, they don't have access to anything. So as a contractor, they cannot see any resources, but they do have the ability to request additional access into it using our access workflow engine. Out of the box, Teleport has 4 roles. So if this looks a little overwhelming, this is a demo environment. So I'm always playing and setting up different roles along that line. But if you go out there today and pull down our open source or start our cloud trial, you're going to see 4 roles out of the box. We have an admin role, an auditor role, I believe an editor role as well, and then a developer role. So there's a couple of high-level roles that are out of the box that you can use as templates. On top of that, we also have a Terraform provider that recently came out. So we encourage users to leverage Terraform and infrastructure as code best practices, build your roles, then store them on a Git repository, GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, wherever. And then you can leverage our Terraform provider in order to update and manage roles. So going back to this, so I'm an admin, and we can even go on my user screen and we can see that I'm logged in here and it says, hey, this person has an admin. They also have AWS console access. And it even lets me know how I'm authenticating within Teleport. My one user is authenticating using GitHub, and my other user is authenticating using SAML. You do have the concept of local users within a Teleport cluster, and it's great for testing and proof of concepts. But probably from a production standpoint, you probably do not want to have a whole bunch of local users, just because that's all stored within Teleport database and a little bit more to manage on that line. Tying in an authentication connector is really easy as well. So as you saw at the beginning there, I had a whole bunch of them, and this lists all the details of these different authentication connectors. So as an example, if I go into my Okta connector, this shows me, everything I need to set up. Again, it's in YAML, and I can map my groups to my users and what I need to do in order to leverage an OIDC or SAML compliant. We do get a lot of questions about Azure and Active Directory. Even though I do not have that set up, we do have full support for that. So as long as something is SAML or OIDC compliant, can easily plug it in here within it. So let's segue a moment and jump into the server portion of it. So how those roles define what you can see, what you can and cannot see. So as a user, and let's say from a command line, because most users are probably not going to do work from a browser, but for demo purposes, we'll show that. So I'm a user, I'm logged into my Teleport system. I've been issued a 8-hour certificate. Basically, it says you're valid, and I can log in as any of these users if my backend Linux systems support those. So I'm going to go ahead and log into this one user. I'm going to log into Ubuntu AWS Server 1. I don't have to know the IP address. I can use it by the node name, which I'm connecting here. You can also connect into a system using key value pairs, which is another neat way of accessing. If someone is like, oh, I know it runs this application, I don't remember its IP or its host name, but I can log in as that way as well. So for this instance, I'm logging in. Whoops, helps if I actually type in the right command. There you go. So I'm going to log in. The TSH is our binary. It's a Teleport binary. It's basically a replacement for SSH that adds a few other really cool features to it. So our TSH, I'm going to log in into this server. So it's going back, proxying through Teleport and saying, hey, do I have rights and privileges? And because my certificate says I do, and based on my role, I have access to it as well, it lets me in. I am now on my server. So I can run really high quality production applications like Dad Joke or whatever it else, that might be out there. So I'm on this server running commands, doing what I need to do as an administrator on this server. Here's some of the magic that's happening on the back end from a Teleport perspective. And this is underlying what I'm going to show here from our audit log and things like this is kind of the core of what Teleport does for really all of our protocols. First of all, I have an active session. And what this does, it Teleport's letting me know if I log into the web UIs that, hey, look, a user is actively connected to a resource right now. It even gives me the IP address where they're connecting to, what the user is, and then even the node that they're connecting to. I also have an audit log. So Teleport has the ability to log this information. This is the critical piece where we talk to companies and users that say, hey, we need an audit or compliance. We need something along that line. So now I've got an audit log that is auditing what is happening within my cluster. So when I run a command like figlet or dad joke, it is pulling this information across and from a binary. Now, this really detailed logging is an option that you can turn on in Teleport. It's basically BPF or Berkeley packet filtering. It enables Teleport to do kernel level auditing of commands. So as an example, when I type in dad joke and it just looks like a generic, you type it in, you get a joke back and you don't think anything of it. But underneath of it, Teleport realizes that that was a curl out to a certain website. So with BPF turned on, it does a little bit of a granular kernel level of understanding what that command was. So we can see it was a curl, and here's the destination IP that I was curling to in order to pull the latest dad joke of the moment. And so things like BPF enhanced recording is great when you got environments or areas where you need to have really detailed logging within your systems. By default, it's not turned on out of the box, but it is an option that you can turn on within your servers. So let's go back to our active session puzzle here. So let's say I'm on a server and I'm doing work and I'm here in South Carolina where I live and I'm stuck. And maybe my boss is somewhere across the US, maybe he's traveling or she's traveling and I'm not able to get, and I'm stuck. As an engineer, I'm stuck. I can't just walk over to their desk and say, hey, can you look at my screen and share? We might be able to fire off a Zoom like this or Google Meet or Teams and share a screen and, hey, click this, type that, do whatever. Makes it a little challenging. So what we can do with Teleport, you actually can join a session. So what I'm doing now is I'm actually joining this session. So as a user, I'm already logged in here and I say, hey, I need help. Maybe an admin, another developer can come along and they can say, oh, wow, cool. Here's the issue. Let's hop in. So now we can collaborate and work together on this system. So commands typed in one screen are going to show up in the other. So if I'm troubleshooting something, looking at what's happening within the system, we can go back and kind of collaborate, talk through, and figure things out. On the Teleport side, it sees that there's a secondary user has connected. So we can see that, hey, sessions are joined, someone else is on that session. So let's say we're done, we finish our work, we're going to clear it out, and now we're going to exit. All work is done, everyone's logged out of the system. I go back to my session screen within Teleport. That session is no longer active. It's gone because it's not an active session anymore. And this is where the other piece here, Teleport, happens is it uploads a session recording of the session. So I can go back and maybe we had an event that happened on an evening or during a deployment, and you need a postmortem or just from a security aspect, you want to audit what's happening. I can go and play back this session and see what's going on in my cluster. So for this aspect, I can see, all right, so this user's on the system, he's running dad joke a few times and, typing in different commands and, whatever. I can pause this. I can fast forward if I wanted to. I can rewind, so Teleport gives you the ability to do that. I could even take this session recording and play it back from my browser, from my command line. So I can play if I have the rights and permissions because my local user is also an admin. So I can hit play. And now I'm doing a playback within my command line environment as well. So it's a great tool from that kind of audit compliance. And you can even go back within Teleport, look at my last 7 days. So you can see all the sessions I've been doing over the last couple of weeks. Maybe somebody says, hey, you guys remember that July 4 incident where, somebody put fireworks on the system. So let's go back and look what happened on July 4 within that range. And let's go play back these sessions and kind of seeing what was happening within our cluster. So you have the ability to do that with our session playback along that line. And it's a great way to get in, an introspective of something happening, see activity on it, especially if you have new engineers or you're onboarding. We have some customers that use session recordings as a way to, postmortems when they're troubleshooting or even onboarding new engineers. So there's a lot of options you have along that line. All of your servers, you're probably wondering, well, I could just access these servers however willy-nilly, wherever they're at. Well, and this is where one of the neat things about it is that Teleport, these servers that I'm accessing, none of them have public IP addresses or public access to that. So my AWS servers, they only have an internal IP address. My GCP servers have internal IP address. So the only way to get to these is through Teleport or via AWS console, web console, or command line AWS, or even the GCP SDK, the G Cloud compute command line options. So I'm accessing systems across the world that are, doing work on it, able to do it because they're reverse tunneled back to the cluster. So for environments where you've stood up Bastion host or you're using a VPN, you can eliminate those by leveraging Teleport. In essence, it becomes that Bastion host, but with some added things there. I don't have any keys on these servers. I don't have any users on them, except for a couple that have the Ubuntu user that I've created because there are Ubuntu boxes. But they're all reverse tunneled out, so I'm able to do work on them as a end user. So no matter where your systems live around the world, you're able to do that with Teleport and manage it along that line. So I'm going to segue here. We're going to talk quickly on the application piece here, the next piece of our access plane and how that works. So our access plane is basically like a web application, a proxy for it, where you can put private dashboards like a Grafana dashboard, or in my instance, maybe a private GitHub type of repository out there, and I can put it behind Teleport. So that way, instead of using a VPN or whitelisting people's IP addresses, we can just give them permissions, say, hey, you as a user have rights and permissions to access this application. You have to do it through Teleport. So I'm doing that. So Gogs is an open source self-hosted GitHub is running on one of my servers. It's only running in one of my servers that has a private IP address. So that's key. This server does not have a public available 80 or 443, only through Teleport. So I'm able to access this from within Teleport if I have the rights and permissions. So maybe I want to log into this box here and do my work as a user. Let me see here, Gogs admin, and I can sign in. And now I can run my dashboard. I can do my pull requests. I can create issues or whatever I need to do as a developer or engineer. Teleport is going to audit certain information on an application. So it sees that an application session has started, but it's not actually logging my interaction with that application. It's something Teleport does not do. So it can gate access to this application and allow me to, get to a public or a private application, but it's not giving me, it's not auditing what's happening within it. It's just something out of the box that we do not do. Well, if you say, well, what if a user bookmarks this? Because I get a fully qualified domain name. And so maybe a user is going to bookmark that and say, I'll just go to it directly. So they save it, they type it into their browser, and here's what happens. Teleport says, hey, you're trying to access an application that's gated. You don't have access to it, so you need to authenticate. You need to log in. So I'm like, oh, great. So maybe I'll log in as my user. So I'm going to log in here as that contractor user. Let's get my password for that one, because I use randomly generated passwords for everything. So I store it that way. So it's going, it wants me to authenticate to a different thing here. So let me get my other security code for that one really quickly here. That way we can sign in here and say, what is this user trying to do? So bear with me a moment there. 7. And I do recommend that in your environment, you do set up MFA or two-factor authentication. It's just, It can be a little bit painful at times trying to manage something like that, but in the long run, from a security with today's data breaches and things like that, definitely set something like that up. So what happened here is, right, I logged in, I authenticated to GitHub as a contractor user, but then it bounces me back to this application and it says, you know what, it's not found. The reason being is because as a contractor, I do not have rights to this application. So let's go back in my contractor role here that I'm authenticated in as, and I'm not allowed to access any applications, but I can request access to these applications. So let's say I go back here and I go to my screen and I don't have any applications, but maybe I need access to something. Well, I can actually access or request access to this application. So for this instance, maybe as this user, I say, hey, I need access to this GOGS app. Please let me in to do my work. So I'm going to fire that off. And this, I'm going to segue this application access into what we call our chat ops kind of model or thinking on that line. So this is where it comes in, where if you have something set up within Teleport from a chat ops perspective, now you can kind of see what's happening. So I fired off that request because a contractor needed access to GOGS and they don't have it. So my Slack bot there says, hey, we have a new request coming in. A user needs access to this application. Can someone approve it or deny it? I could click this link. It'll open up my browser in another window here, my other browser. So for instance, for this case, I'm just going to go here to access request and I can see it. So let's view it. I could approve it or deny it. I can leave a message. And there's a whole threshold of different things you can do with access requests, multiple users to approve or deny, etc. Don't commit to production or whatever I want to say as a note to that user. So what happens now is my access request gets approved. I have a little thread going on here. So I've got this kind of audit trail of what's happening. Now as a user, I can refresh the screen and I can see that, hey, it's been approved. So now let's assume this role. So I have assumed an apps role. And so by doing so, if I go back to my application screen, I am now able to see this application that I need to now log in to do my work. So I can fire it off, I can launch it. It's going to drop me into that page and grant me access. I can sign in with my user and kind of go from there. And so on the Teleport side, again, from an audit section, we've got an access request created. We can see a request was created by a user, by the contractor, what the reason is, what the role is, and then it was reviewed, and then they had started that session. So that's how, so I kind of tackled two birds there, quickly. One, application access, how Teleport managed and gates some of that. Then using our access workflow to allow users to gain access into different applications or tools as they need to. So let's segue here to the third piece. And I know this seems as you're probably looking like, wow, that's a lot of info. Again, if you have any questions or you wanted to see something, just raise your hand or type it in chat, and happy to answer any of that as it comes up. But in the meantime, let's segue to the Kubernetes piece of the puzzle here. So I have access to one Kubernetes cluster. That's all I have set up, and I can actually look at it here as well from within my Teleport command line tool. So now I want to gain access to it. So I want to make sure I'm authenticated in. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. And what this does, if my context has not been set already, it's going to set my kubeconfig file so that I have access to this Kubernetes cluster. So according to this, I've been granted access and my kubeconfig file has been set. So now I can actually get information about my Kubernetes cluster. Because I'm system masters, it's going to get me all my namespaces. It's going to, I can get my pods. And because it's my default one is an Nginx pod, so it's showing that one. So on the back end, similar to our application and our server side, from an audit perspective, here's what's happening. Teleport sees that I'm making requests into Kubernetes. And it's because Teleport is protocol aware. It knows, hey, this is a Kubernetes API call. So we're going to log it. We're going to keep track of it. We're going to, really dig down and know what that user is doing. So if I use a tool like Lens, which a lot of customers use because, yes, we can do a lot of Kubernetes stuff on the command line, but doing something using a UI tool is a little bit easier. You get a little bit better dashboard to view and what's happening out there. I can log into that. And because I'm connected and my certificate is valid, Lens is going to populate everything that I need to know about the cluster. My audit log is going to get really busy really fast because I'm the Teleport user, Valiant, that's making all these Kube API calls via Teleport. So I'm in here looking at my config maps, if I have any, my secrets, my daemon sets, etc. Teleport is going to audit all this information. So it gives you really good visibility into, Kubernetes activity across the world, different clusters that you may or may not have. One thing that's really cool on the Teleport side here is the ability to do session recording of Kubernetes execs into pods. So an example, I had an Nginx pod here, right? And normally, maybe we're not SSHing into any production pods, but for this instance, we had something going on and a user needs to gain access to figure out what's happening on the pod itself. So they exec into it, they're doing work, and then they log off. And no harm, no done. Or maybe that pod crashed and then replication controllers spun out a new one. A couple things. We're going to see our continued Kubernetes access and even our session requests, knowing that, hey, we've started a session within that. But then at the end there, Teleport's going to actually upload a session recording of that interaction into that pod. So I got my cluster, I got my namespace, and then the pod itself. And actually go back and now playback. So you say, hey, why did our production pod crash? And what happened there? Well, we got a session recording. We can see that John Doe was on this box. And they were running some commands, and here's what happened. So again, we do session recordings on SSH as well as Kubernetes, which provides insight and ability for companies and organizations to see what's happening within their environments on that piece. And if I log out of my Kubernetes, when I do log out, my ability and access to these systems is now revoked. And I'll show that here at the end. Our last piece of the activity of our four main parts here is our ability to leverage, database connectivity. And similar to my SSH nodes here, I have a whole bunch of databases, some on AWS, some on GCP. None of these databases have public IP addresses, public ingress into them. They're on private network and they're not able to, no one can get to them. If I try to run queries on these databases, nothing's going to happen. It's going to error out because I just don't have access to it. But according to Teleport, I should have access to it. So let me look here and look at what rights I have to a database. I see I have 4 of them I'm able to see, but I'm not actually authenticated into any of them. So I'm going to go ahead and log into my AWS or MySQL database. So what this does, it sets a different certificate that is just for the database connectivity. So I still have my SSH certificate, but I'm now getting a short-lived X509 certificate from a database side that gives me the rights and permissions to access those databases. And I can actually look at them. Well, it's deep here in your hidden folder called TSH where your keys are stored. So now that I'm in here, I can see I put my cluster name for that database and it has connected me because it sees that I now have a valid certificate. So now I can run my queries on this database and get the information that I need and do my work as a DBA or a data scientist or however I need to do. So let's pivot back here to the audit log. You're probably seeing a pattern here, right? Everything that we do in the front end from an access, Teleport is logging and auditing it on the back end. And because it's protocol aware, I now see things like database queries. We can see that, hey, this user has connected to this database. And here's the database URI. It's a private database, 3306, even though I'm only accessing it via 443 and my client. I'm logged in as this database user because I've been assigned that role. So I have permissions to that. And now I can run queries on that database itself. I'm running a select all from employees. So if somebody says, hey, this table crashed or something went bad and whatever, I didn't do anything, through Teleport, you can say, well, we see here you did a drop table, or, you deleted that user or that, whole row or column or whatever it is. Teleport has that audit where it's transparent to an end user. They're just able to access their systems. They're able to do the work that they need to do from a day-to-day perspective. But on a security compliance standpoint, you have this nice trail that you're able to see what is happening within your cluster. And that's the whole premise of it, right? When we looked at that slide at the beginning, security and agility, we want our devs to be able to access things quickly without a whole lot of roadblocks. But yet we want to have that security piece there to manage and to audit and track what's happening within our system. And so those are the four key pieces here of Teleport, the four that we have, right, from our access plane. So let me go back to we'll go back to our slide here in a minute. So going back here at the beginning, right here, we got server access, Kubernetes, application, and database as well. So I got a question here from user David. Is TSH uploading the session recordings from the client, or is the recording actually done on server side? So it's actually done on the server side. So my client here, so the server that I'm SSH into is recording that, and then it's uploaded on the back end. With SSH, that recording is basically done when that session terminates, it gets uploaded immediately. From a Kubernetes standpoint, it's streamed. The session recording is streamed in basically real time. You could change that on the SSH side to change it to real time. That is a Teleport configuration that could possibly be done. So so as a user, if I'm trying to manipulate something here locally with my TSH client, it's not going to work. Great question though. So segueing back here, as I mentioned, we're an open source project, and this is our GitHub repo. You can see we've got 10,300 stars now, and it's a very active project. You can actually see what's coming down the pipeline. And I just want to give you a little heads up. We have a version 8 coming down. So we're on 7.3, but we actually have a version 8 that's coming down in a couple weeks. And it's going to be pretty amazing because it's going to have Windows support, because I noticed in my slide here, I showed we had Windows support, but it's not there yet. So it's coming. It's in alpha right now, or beta. So we got Windows remote support. So enterprises that need Windows support, you're going to have the ability to do that. Plus other cool features, being able to access more databases and some other things coming down the road. So going back to here, as we kind of tail out here, how do you get started with it today, right? We've got open source. You can hop in on GitHub. You can contribute. When there, we got a Slack community where I'm on there. A lot of our sales engineers, even our developers and other support folks, a community help for people running the open source version or just have questions around it. We do have a free trial. So we have two options. You can host Teleport in your own environment today. You can we also have a SaaS version of it from an enterprise side. So companies that don't want to deal with that infrastructure piece of it. So you can actually go and sign up there. And then, our discussions we have along that line as well. And I got another question here. Does Teleport support Keycloak as an OIDC SSO in the community edition, along with GitHub? Only supports GitHub. That is correct. So some of the key differences between community open source and our enterprise is the community open source only has GitHub as its primary SSO provider. So you can use a local username and password, or you can use GitHub as your SSO. So if you need something like Keycloak or GitLab or Okta Auth0, that does require our enterprise version for that. I also want to give a shout out to us as a company. I've been here since February, and we have probably doubled in size since then. We are a Series B funded company, and we've got, at least as of a couple of days ago, 30 some openings across engineering, sales, product marketing, and we're a fully distributed company. So we've got somebody that works in Nepal, which is super awesome. Somebody in Alaska, a couple folks in Australia, a whole bunch in Europe, and of course, Latin America and South America and the US and Canada. So having a distributed company is what we're all about. And so if you want to be involved with a company building really cool open source products, love to see you guys, see anyone apply. How to get a hold of me is there's my contact information. I am on LinkedIn. I am also in our Teleport Slack community as Alan Valancourt. I'm on Twitter. If I do tweet, it's usually something around Teleport or food or my dog or board games. But feel free to shoot me a connection there as well. If you have any, you just want to connect professionally, ask any questions or via email, happy to help along that line as well. And I know we have a few minutes left, so I want to say thank you for hopping on today's webinar. And if you have any more questions, we'll leave it open here for another minute or two and answer any questions. Or if there's something, because we have a few minutes here, because we go for I think another 10 minutes. If there's something you want to see a little bit more detail on the demo side, I can also show that off as well. And of course, our website, goteleport.com, is where it all starts. So I know that was a huge whirlwind of content. It's a whirlwind of what Teleport is, right? It's, end of the day, we're trying to solve these issues for our engineers and trying to make life easier for them by, simplifying that access and agility, security through point. Got another question here. There used to be a HAR format recordings for web apps. Is that still a thing? That's a great question because I do not know. So I'm going to write that down because I am not aware. I know for our web application piece, it's not, it's there and it works really well. Like we have AWS console access now and a few other things, but we're not recording what's happening on the back end. There are some roadmap things for building out the web application piece there and getting it, but our engineering team is growing and they're trying to prioritize different features. And right now, a lot of the focus is on cloud, Kubernetes, and database side of the fence. So, but I can look into that and just to find out if there is a HAR format on that. I am not aware of that off the top. Oh, and let me show you one thing. What happens when a user logs out, right? So as I'm all authenticated in, so I'm going to go ahead and log out. So I've lost access to my Kubernetes, so I'm going to get an error on Kubernetes because my kube config is now gone. So if I use my tool like Lens that is here, it sees that it's also gone as well. So I'm not able to access my cluster because that kube config. So that's one piece from a Kubernetes standpoint where you have different clusters and you don't want those users to keep those kube configs on their system. Using a tool like Teleport that manages that for you, then you don't have to worry about those kube configs getting compromised or taken out there or whatever, because Teleport is managing that access to those systems as well. So I just wanted to show that piece of the puzzle. Other than Terraform, is there API access? There is. Our API is a gRPC based API. So in our documentation here, let me fire it off real quick. So right here in our documentation, we have an API section that gives a little bit of introduction of how it can, what you can do with it, how to get started, and some of the architecture behind it, like creating a user or whatever along that line. And there's some examples as well in our GitHub for that. So that is from the API, that's what it is, not a full-on kind of web API. We do have another project. So we got Teleport as our primary project, but we have a Teleport plugin. Oh, maybe it's plugins. There it is. So we have another project called Teleport Plugins. And this is where like our Slack plugin or our Terraform provider is here. This is where a lot of that information is built, along with some API information of how to create your own plugin. Because we've had users asking, hey, we use this tool or that tool, can you build a webhook? So instead of making a feature within Teleport that now has to be managed, our dev team, engineering team, has kind of basically said, hey, you can build a plugin that interacts with Teleport for that. So like Jira or Slack or Mattermost. One of our more recent plugins is an event handler plugin. So if you're using Splunk or Logarithm, Devo, any kind of big SIEM out there, you can actually run an event handler plugin that lets you export your audit logs out from Teleport, like our Teleport Cloud or different nodes, and forward them into a SIEM of your choice. So that was something relatively new. You can see examples of how it's all built. Everything for the most part is built in Go from Teleport. Good question though. All righty. Well, it's give you guys a couple minutes left here. So again, appreciate your questions. Again, look for a follow-up if you have any questions. Let us know. We're here to help you all and on your journey as you're digging into what Teleport is and all that. But I appreciate your time today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.